Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is David Charis. I'm with the grants team at the Edmonton Arts Council, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Bradley Moss from Theatre Network and Haily Taskey from, and I'm going to get this wrong, is it Lloyd Sad?
Lloyd Sad, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. The Edmonton Arts Council acknowledges the traditional land on which Edmonton, Omisquechee, Waskahegan sits, the territory of the Treaty 6 First Nations, and the homelands of the Métis people. We would like to recognize and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Nahewa Cree, Dene Sulene, Nakota Sioux, Saulteaux, Niitsitape, Blackfoot, as well as the Métis and the Inuk peoples. It's a welcoming place for all peoples who come together from around the world to share Edmonton as a home. Together, we call upon all of our collective honored traditions and spirits to work in building a great city for today and for future generations. Today's session is part of a series of free offerings that the Edmonton Arts Council is programming both for individual artists and for arts organizations. Coming up next in our calendar on December 7th, there is a session held in partnership with the Writers Guild of Alberta about writing from perspectives other than your own. All of these sessions are free and are made available after the fact on the Edmonton Arts Council's YouTube channel, where they are enjoyed by tens of adoring fans. It is my great pleasure now to turn it over to Bradley Moss, the Artistic Director at Theatre Network. Brad has been with Theatre Network as the Artistic Director since 19, and has in that time experienced a couple of extraordinary incidents that have helped to highlight the importance of insurance in this work. Over to you, Brad.
Oh, thanks, David. Yeah, I guess I've had a bit of a learning curve with different experiences, and that's really what I want to share with folks today, is just a couple of stories of experiences that we went through with insurance. So yeah, and just sort of knowing like when you need, knowing also like when you need help too is something that I'll share with you. So the first story I want to start off with is back in David Charis was the general manager of Theatre Network at this time. And it was 1997, and we had a massive flood in the building, and we had the Christmas Carol project was about to open that weekend. And the pipe had burst in the back, and the whole building was shaking when David and I came in the morning, and suddenly everything was off. Power, the gas, everything was turned off. And it was, I have to say, it was actually a really amazing experience. The broker and the insurance company were in so quick. They got fire remediation happening, and within 48 hours we were up and the show was happening on stage. So it was a pretty incredible experience, and it was also the first step of I guess I would call my learning curve, which was we had a total replacement policy. And these are the things that you need to sort of do on the front end with your broker, because you can also get total loss, which I'll explain a little bit about those in a bit. So with total replacement, what that meant is that they basically have to come in and replace anything that was broken as you purchased. So in our case, it turned out to be a double bonus experience, because what happened was in rushing to get us up in 48 hours, they had to get a furnace in the back that wasn't the right amount of CCUs or BTUs. And so generosity, they turned around and said, hey, do you want an extra furnace? And we really needed an extra furnace. And it was all because it wasn't just the right amount of CCs or BTUs. So that was a real learning curve on that, in terms of like, if you have I guess I would put that in the small bucket disaster, because we were probably under 50,000 of at the end of the day with all of the stuff that had to be replaced or fixed or repaired. And so fully supported, in there quick, changing stuff, making it happen. So that was a really First lesson, and also the first lesson in replacement and what that means when you're working with your insurance company. So the second story was, of course, our fire in January of 2015. And because you have a replacement policy in that case, what happened to us is then you have to basically, and it's really unfair to all parties. I'll put that on the table, because we had to basically, from paper, rebuild our whole theater after we just lost it on paper, put that to tender. That went out to construction companies as if we were rebuilding the whole theater, remaking it as it was, the old Roxy. And so in that replacement, it's to determine your value so that the insurance company knows like what they're going to give you for a check in terms of the replacement, to see where the value is. And that caused like a lot of hardship for both sides, because then you're digging in on stuff that you don't have paperwork for. You're digging in on your business interruption, which then led me to realize like we were over our heads in that situation. So I was very lucky to come upon a firm out of Calgary called Longdown. And Longdown is basically insurance folks who had shifted over to the side where they represent folks like ourselves and others in that situation where you're struggling to get all of the processes completed and to get the ball moving forward. And when they came aboard, it really started to move effectively forward in terms of the business interruption, gathering our data for gear. And so it's a very complicated problem when you have a big loss like that. So for me, the big lessons were one, like you have to read your policy. You got to take your own responsibilities and really get to know your policy. Also, if you've got a great broker, they're really great to help you make these decisions and have clarity as to what you're choosing. So like in our case with the old Roxy, and I would recommend this for older buildings, is if you're in a situation to sign insurance, and like in the old like Catalyst that we were in, I would go for what's called total loss in your policy, because then it just makes it easier for everybody. If there's a big disaster, then it's just an agreed upon amount and the check is written and everybody goes forward. Because whereas now in a new building that we're resurrecting, the new Roxy, chosen to go with total replacement. Well, it's brand new. So, and we have all of the paperwork in front of us, from the drawings, even the changes to the building, to all of our equipment lists. So to replace stuff at this point in our process is the right choice for us. So those are a couple of big things at the end of these small and large disasters that I wanted to share with you. And then I have a bonus round that I'd like to share with you. And as our previous broker during the fire would call this, the term for insurance, it's called extra expense. And I forgot this. I had to call Haily back and go, what is that again? Anyways, it's called extra expense. And commonly, or I guess also known as go F yourself insurance. And this is from the broker themselves, because it's an amount that you agree upon when you have a disaster that then the check just comes your way. And I think for the fire was 50 grand. And in hindsight, it could have been 150, 200, almost the same price. It's known to be a very cheap addition to your policy. Especially when you're trying to get back on your feet, to have that cash come in and help you, extra expense is the caveat that I'm here to share today. Otherwise, you got to work with your insurance broker, get clarity on what your coverage is needed, your choices. And I think like anything in life, if you've got a good relationship with your broker, then a lot of it gets solved on the front end of things. So when the disasters happen, then they can do their job, which is to come in and support you and get you back up on your feet. And that's what I have to share today, David.
Thank you so much, Brad. And now I'd love to turn it over to Haily to provide a professional perspective from the broker side.
Thank you very much for having me, you guys. It's very appreciated to be here. So my name is Haily Taskey. I'm a partner and senior advisor with Lloyd Insurance. I do specialize in the not-for-profit sector as well as insuring arts organizations. And so we figured it would be a great idea for Bradley and I to team up to talk a little bit about insurance, what type of insurance your organizations may require, depending on your risks associated with your specific organization. Maybe if I can actually turn the screen on my, there we go. Technology is still escaping me these days. So I know that this page is quite wordy. There's a lot of text in here. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what these coverages are, a little bit of top line, top down, ways that they could be implemented within your organization if your organization does require it, what they are, why you might need them. And always feel free to ask any questions if you want clarification on anything. As Bradley explained, there are risks for all types of organizations, but he has specifically in firsthand dealt with some significant property related losses with his position with the Theatre Network and the Roxy. So property is our very top line cover. And I do encourage, you know, on my little side notes is how do you know what coverage your organization does require? Consult with a broker. Have that collaborative discussion. Pick a broker that's going to work with you and have the discussion of what risks do you have? Do you own property? Do you lease property? What other types of liability exposures do you have as the organization? And create the program that's right for your organization specifically, instead of thinking, oh, I know, I definitely just need X, Y, and Z and nothing else. There may be things that are uncovered in those conversations with a broker that you may not even realize you may require for insurance coverage. So the very top piece, specifically property. This is your tangible assets. So this is coverage for your building, your contents, any tenants improvements. You don't necessarily have to own the facility to require property coverage either. Depending on what that lease agreement says, you may be required to actually insure a portion of property of the space that you occupy. So checking your leases, ensuring that they are in line with the insurance coverage that you are purchasing is really important. Bradley did touch on the extra expense aspect of property coverage. And so business interruption extra expense is specifically triggered by an insured property claim. So water, fire are two very perfect examples of when business interruption gets triggered on a policy. And the extra expense aspect, even the profits, I know nonprofit, but Bradley and I go back on this discussion all the time with respect to the profits coverage piece of business interruption insurance. And so the insurance industry calls it profits. If you are a nonprofit organization, I refer to it as loss of revenue, loss of flow through funding, loss of ticket sales as a result of losing your main location, and you are unable to operate in that location due to an insured property loss. Extra expense, any over and above operating expenses that the organization requires to get moved and operational elsewhere as quickly as possible. So basically money injected into the organization to get moving again. These pieces of coverage at the end of the day can really help save an organization. It can help once we get you operational in a new space, now the loss of the actual revenue or the funding, ticket sales is not nearly as impactful as it would be if you just stopped and ceased operations completely at the end of the day due to a property loss. Machinery breakdown, also known as boiler and machinery insurance. It's a little bit of a funny terminology for what it actually covers. Sometimes we do find lease agreements that require tenants to actually carry this type of cover, even if you don't own the facility specifically. So machinery breakdown, boiler and machinery insurance also relates to any sort of break, mechanical failure in, let's say, an air conditioning unit, heating elements, any pressure vessels, so hot water tanks, electrical panels, surging to computer equipment, phone systems. So this coverage is, you would think it would be covered under a property loss. However, property policies have a very specific exclusion relating to any type of machinery breakdown. So we pair this type of policy up with a property policy to make sure that there's no gaps within that exclusion on a property policy. So even if you are a tenant in a facility, there could be a requirement under your lease to have this as coverage, as well as it is extremely cheap to just add it to the policy, and any sort of electrical surging to computer equipment, phone systems, those types of things would be covered underneath this type of policy. General liability. This is one of the meat and potatoes cover that organizations need. bodily injury, property damage to a third party, slips, trips, falls of anybody coming within to your premises to come and even view a show, an art gallery, anything like that. If somebody is hurt on your premises and they bring a suit towards the organization, this coverage needs to be enforced in order to provide defense for the organization if they were found to be negligent in that case. So really important to have this coverage. This section of coverage also has a few other ancillary pieces along with it. So this is where your tenant's legal liability would be provided if you needed that type of cover. And so the tenant's legal liability would cover to repair the internal space that you occupy, where the general liability would then pick up to repair the entire building if you were found negligent for property damage to a third party. So not your own property damage, but someone else's property, a space that you lease, let's say. Another piece of coverage that is included under a general liability policy would be non-owned auto coverage. So non-owned auto coverage would provide defense to an organization if somebody operating a vehicle that the organization does not own causes an accident while on business for that organization. Bank runs, running to Costco, getting supplies for a staff room, and that individual, maybe they are an employee, even a volunteer, causes an accident, and the third party within that accident brings a suit to the organization, then there is also defense for the company for a non-owned auto accident. Really important, just a piece of ancillary coverage that gets thrown in under this. Crime liability. The biggest portion on this type of coverage is employee dishonesty is what we're seeing. And we are actually seeing, unfortunately, a lot of employee dishonesty increase in the nonprofit space. So anything from double paying them somebody at payroll to creating fake purchase orders and sending it in for payment under a fake company name. There's a lot of different ways that individuals, unfortunately, can fraud organizations. I always suggest to any group, watch your checks and balances and the way that money is moved. Double signatures on all checks income that leave the organization. Basically segregation of duties, so somebody cannot deposit as well as withdraw money from the organization. Just create those safeguards as well as put a crime liability policy in place for the money of the organization. Directors and officers liability and employment practices liability, these go hand in hand. So these coverages really should be all within the same policy. Directors and officers liability, I could do a complete presentation just on this cover alone. It is an extremely important piece of coverage for any organization that has a board, or any organization that actually even has employees. You don't even necessarily have to have a board for this to be applicable. So directors and officers liability, employment practices liability, we have these coverages in place for protection for D's and O's of an organization. Anybody that is a director or officer of an organization while they are sitting on the board are held personally liable for any decisions that they do make for an organization. This policy acts a little bit like a personal liability protection policy for those individuals sitting on your boards. It is extremely important to make sure that these are in place. The employment practices liability that tees up with the directors and officers section of coverage provides cover for wrongful dismissal suits, discrimination, stuff like that, where it's almost a mismanagement in employment related matters is really what the secondary piece of coverage for. There are a handful of other types of coverages that do fall in underneath the directors and officers employment practices liability. So if anybody has additional questions on that, I'm happy to answer. Like I said, I could do a whole presentation just on directors and officers coverage specifically. Cyber liability. I am sure everybody has heard what has happened and what is going on in our lovely world of computer systems and cyber criminals. In the Canadian marketplace in the past year and a bit, we have seen over a 500% increase in cyber attacks and breaches across all types of organizations. I am adamant that any of my groups and my clients are carrying this type of coverage. This type of coverage can really make sure that the costs associated with a cyber attack and breach is not then left on the shoulders of an organization specifically. It can cost a lot of money. I have had a number of clients where they have been taken, their systems have been taken ransom for an extortion demand. And one, the cost of negotiation, and I don't know how to negotiate against cyber criminals. So these policies put different assistance in place where you can leverage the help from experts in order to assist you through a cyber breach and an attack specifically on your system. There's a lot of different factors and costs that come into a specific cyber loss. A lot of misconception comes from, oh, I store all my stuff with a cloud provider and it's held from a third party, so it wouldn't be my responsibility if anything was breached. However, the privacy commissioner actually deems that the group that was initially entrusted with the information is actually responsible still for the information being breached, and they still have to have some level of response associated, even if that third-party cloud provider has experienced a breach in their systems. So these policies really are, we call it, my favorite insuring agreement on this is a first party cover. And basically the first party cover provides coverage for the organization themselves and affords costs to that organization for them to basically investigate what happened, notify individuals that their information has been breached, cover the costs associated with it, gain experts and gain advice from experts on how to negotiate the return of a system, as well as, you know, there's breach monitoring coaches, there is reputational harm cover on this stuff. It is quite an incredible policy, but it is starting to become a really significant risk for any organization. This is not an exhaustive list of coverages that are available or may be applicable to specific arts organizations. Another one that you're not seeing on here is auto liability. If an organization owns a vehicle, I think that's relatively self-explanatory. You do need an auto policy, but these are the types of commercial business cover that I think is a really good discussion point for most organizations, and a starting point of where groups need to make sure that if they have the risk, these are the pieces that we need to be placing to ensure that we cover them off. Another question that I do get a lot is an insurance company versus a broker. What is the difference? Why are there two of us? We're actually extremely different in our functionality. Brokers are able to approach the insurance marketplace. So we would approach insurance companies to source quotes, proposals for our clients. So we would go directly to an insurer, which is what they're called, and request premiums, quotes, coverages in return, and then be able to present it to our clients specifically. So give them kind of that platter of insurance profile and program that fits the organization's risks specifically. An insurance company is the group that's actually providing the paper or the insurance for the product and for that organization. So the insurance company is the group that ends up paying the claims. The broker is the individual that is able to negotiate the placement of the insurance program for their clients. And I do always say, pick a broker. It will save you a lot of time and maybe headache in the long run, where picking your broker allows that specific individual to go out to multiple insurance companies on your behalf. The insurance industry has this entertaining or funky little caveat in it where there's this first right of refusal or first in. Insurance companies give the same pricing to all brokers. So we always say, pick the broker you want to work with and have them leverage the marketplace for you so that they can source the coverage options and pricing for the organization specifically. The other piece as well is, as the insurance company pays the claims, your broker is going to be your advocate in the case of a significant or even a minor loss of any sort. So when you're working with a specific broker, determine what their claim services are like. I know at Lloyd said we have claims advocates that work specifically for our clients. That is 100% all that they are hired to do in-house. And they would be available to our clients in the case of any type of complicated, catastrophic, problematic claim situation. As Bradley knows, all claims are not perfect. Insurance companies and the claims process is more often than not a frustrating process. So pair yourself and partner yourself with a broker that's able to assist you through that and walk you through the process of a claim specifically. I think that's kind of all that I have with respect to, you know, an overview of what coverages are, what organizations in the arts world needs for cover. And I do open it up for any questions that the group may have. If anybody within this discussion is looking for just to talk to somebody about sourcing a coverage option, we have arranged that Monica in our office is available, her door is open, and is kind of waiting and willing to take your calls and figure out how she can help.
Haily and Bradley, thank you both so much for that. I know that there was a bit of a drinking from the fire hose to that process, but we have some very smart people on the call today, and I'll throw it open now. There can be questions either in the chat, or you can just open up your camera and mic and ask directly, whatever's most comfortable for you.
Insurance is that exciting.
Okay, well, I'll ask one about directors and officers, and it's one that I've often wondered about because it seems like directors and officers covers them in situations in which the organization has done something wrong, but they haven't. Is that a fair assessment?
So the directors and officers coverage does a number of things. It will defend the D's and O's of an organization if there is, let's say, one director or officer that has done something incorrectly. It will defend them as well as the organization if there is an accusation against, let's say it comes to the group as a failure to implement a safety protocol and procedure, and it's an outside suit coming in. Those policies are intended to provide defense for the organization and the directors and officers associated with a wrongful act, and possibly that wrongful act has that accusation of failure to implement a protocol or procedure. Does that help answer your question a little bit? These policies are inherently broad in nature. So what we see is we actually get a combination of covered losses, covered people and uncovered people, and it can kind of wiggle around between all of these things. And so you may get, a criminal action that is never covered by insurance, but actually it still may be defended by the directors and officers policy, but the settlement may not actually be available because it's not an actual covered loss, but it will defend in that case. So it's very, very broad, and it greatly depends on the specific situation and what unfolds with that specific scenario. But I hope I answered your question and didn't make it too complicated of an answer.
I think so. I'm gonna circle back to it, but we've got a question coming in from someone at Arts Hub. Is there any industry recognition of not-for-profit versus profit when determining insurance fees?
So insurance premiums specifically, when insurance companies look at a nonprofit versus a for-profit operation, they're still looking at what the inherent risk of either organization is, regardless of if they are a for-profit or a not-for-profit. So there's not necessarily a difference in rating associated with it. There may be different ratings associated with the risk associated. Let's say we see less losses on a directors and officers level because that type of organization. And so there's all types of different rating levels, but it's not necessarily determined because you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. Tangible property coverage, depending on the age, security measures of the facility, it's all rated based on their rating matrices and their specific rating in-house. It's not necessarily changed just because you're a not-for-profit. I hope that answered that question.
Great, thank you. Do feel free to follow up if there's additional questions there. Mm-hmm. Bradley, if I can ask, how did planning for insurance coverage mesh with other planning processes as you prepare for this major shift into the new facility? Was it all like, at what point in the process do you have that conversation about coverage and how things change?
Okay, well, it's a good question, David. Actually, the conversations with Haily and I started back when we started construction, frankly. It goes way back there because there's a lot of moving parts. In our transition, for example, we had a bunch of stuff we had to put in storage. So at one point, I think we had insurance on the old catalyst for our contents, plus our liability coverage there because we were operating out of there. Plus we had stuff in storage. So we had storage insurance. Plus we had started insuring the new facility. And then finally now we're here and it's all under one umbrella. But I mean, as far as planning, David, I was kind of like laughing. I don't know what you can do to plan. You have to have your insurance. So, like Haily says, the best thing you can have is a good relationship with your broker. And then I want to bring something up that Haily mentioned about just earlier about picking your broker and working with your broker and stuff, and just maybe some advice for folks to how the industry kind of works for the user a bit. I think one thing you should know is to not try to make them all compete when you're trying to interview them, because you're just going to irritate them. Because like Haily said, they all work with mostly the same insurance companies. So, and they all know each other. So when you make them compete, they kind of. So what we did instead is we picked our top 3 and we interviewed them just straight up and just said, okay, what does this relationship look like? How are you going to work with us? When we were looking at a transition, and Haily came in and she knocked it out of the park. And so we were like, Lloyd is a company that we are a good fit with and we should go with them. And I think that's really, for the user, it's the best advice is you got to really, like anything, build your relationships with the people that you're working with.
That's fair. And I might add a little bit too to the planning aspect of the placement with respect to, the new building coming in. When we were brought on to work with Bradley and the Roxy, it was a very specific and strategic marketing plan to place their insurance with an insurance company that knew of the future plans of the growth of the organization. So we wanted to pick an insurance company that knew that this new building was going to be ready within 2 years of them taking the risk. And that was actually one of the reasons why the insurance company really wanted to work with the group and the theater network, was because of the new facility coming on board. And so I think there's a lot to be said for sustainability and picking an insurance company that's going to be sustainable long-term and has your same growth plans and perspectives and an understanding of where the organization is going to be going in the future. Was a huge, huge benefit, because all of a sudden we had a big, beautiful building and they go, oh, okay, perfect, thank you. Instead of going, oh, that's, insurance companies have limit issues sometimes. So the last thing we needed to get into is a discussion with them, and we needed to move the risk in the middle of the year. So having that understanding and that insurance company that knew that that was going to come down the pipe made the process a lot easier and seamless long-term.
Thank you.
Yeah, I got to throw in there too, David, and I know you're going to jump into the next subject, but how that then leads and ties into an arts habitat question here on, is there recognition of nonprofit versus profit? And so speaking of this relationship, and we can name them, it's Ecclesiastical, who is the insurer here. And so I then, I'm in a position of, trying to handle our cash flow. And of course, the bank is like, hey, you need to do an appraisal. And I'm like, well, that costs a lot of money. And so I called Haily just up by chance. And I said, is there a way you can help me? And she's like, well, actually, yes, your insurance provider, Ecclesiastical, will help provide that information for the bank. And that comes at no cost. So there's your nonprofit savings in terms of folks looking for those kinds of things. So again, it's about your relationship. And in this case, like Haily worked 2 years ahead of the curve to get us the right insurer. And then we get to this point and we're like, this is a great bonus,
Yeah.
Fantastic. Bradley, if this isn't a comfortable topic, of course, you can let me know. But you mentioned coming down. No, it's not talking about anything like that. But you mentioned coming down to a short list of 3 brokers and working from there. What kind of research did you do in selecting a brokerage or selecting those 3?
Wow. Okay, great. So Hayley doesn't know this part of the process.
No.
Okay, so worked with the board, worked with the executive committee, who then reached out to their friends, and they also knew brokers themselves, who then recommended, and then from there, I think we had a list of six or seven. And from there, we then, with that group, went through a whole vetting process of like, okay, who are our top three that we want to call in and do a face-to-face interview with. So that was basically the process. It was with the board, with the executive, using their knowledge, their recommendations. We also circled back with our old broker and gave them the full opportunity to come and compete and be part of that as well. So it was an above board process, and we just sort of vetted with the board team. So I guess maybe that's a confidence builder. Like, you know, you have knowledge on your board, and that's what board members are there for, is to give you those kinds of insights as you're trying to build your connections with other industries.
That's really fantastic. Bravo, and good on you, your board for stepping up and providing that kind of expertise as well.
And being involved, I think, and that's, you know, and you talk about, like, David, you know, you and I know running arts organizations, a big part is getting your board engaged and getting involved. So we look at this as an opportunity for board to bring their experience and to get engaged, and two or three feel very, you know, very proud. Well, I helped with that, you know, and so it's really important too.
Fantastic. Hayley, we've got a question coming in. Are there any processes or due diligence, in parentheses, asset management, that are considered by insurance companies that would be considered when the policy premium is considered? Are there any? I'm not sure how to, Julian, I appreciate the question. I'm not sure I understand it, and so I think I've probably read it wrong. If you're comfortable with doing so, would you mind just coming on and chatting?
Just wondering if there are any processes or due diligence that an organization does. Sorry, I'm trying to type while I'm trying to listen, so it was kind of bad. Anyway, any due diligence that an organization does that's considered when the fees are being considered for an organization in their policies. In other words, if I take care of my building, my risks are lower, so are my fees lower.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, an insurance company is going to look at a number of factors when they're looking at risk and facilities. They'll look at, you know, the year of the facility. Has there been upgrades to the electrical and plumbing? When were those upgrades done? What type of regular maintenance is managed? Who handles the exterior maintenance of the property specifically? And even on the liability side, you know, are there waivers signed depending on what type of operation that you are conducting? You know, if it's an interactive maybe situation or an interactive performance, do you have your guests sign a waiver basically saying, you know, you're taking this on at your own risk? That's always a great thing to show an insurer of what type of risk management organizations are implementing in-house. You know, it'll bring forth, you know, best in class organizations, and ultimately the insurance market's in a bit of a tough spot. So anytime you can show that you are best in class at this point in the marketplace, what it's doing is actually just giving you the ability to even gain coverage versus not gain coverage. And that's how challenging our insurance marketplace is at the moment. Would it change the rating specifically? Where we do get into rating shifts is you know, values, level of or types of property, so frame versus concrete, all of those types of things would change rating from an insurance company's perspective. Liability rating is based on, you know, different levels of revenue. So the more revenue you're bringing in, the more exposure you're putting out there. So there are pieces that definitely dictate costs associated with insurers. I hope that kind of touched on your question and answered that one. Okay, perfect.
Great. Thank you so much, Hayley, and great question, Julian. I'm going to note that for the last 20 months, whether we've liked it or not, we've all become experts in intellectual property law, as tons of arts organizations are suddenly throwing content out online into the great wild west of what does that mean. And so things like errors and omissions insurance that had previously been pretty much the exclusive territory of film and broadcast organizations are now increasingly creeping into conversations elsewhere. In your experience, are the same brokerages and dealing with those kinds of policies and those kinds of coverage, or is that still very separate?
So okay, I'll do my best to kind of interpret the question. So errors and omissions coverage, I think this might be maybe a two-part answer. So we are able to source as a broker any type of cover that you require as an organization. So it'll just depend on, do you require that coverage? So errors and omissions coverage is notoriously cover available for if there is any advice given from an organization. Advertising liability is also included underneath the general liability policy. So if there's any, error in communication in that type, there is that portion underneath the general liability policy. Now, errors and omissions coverage specifically, if you are teaching, if you are giving any sort of type of advice that could cause financial harm to a third party, that would be when an organization needs errors and omissions coverage specifically. As for who can purchase it, who can sell it, who can source it, most, if not all, brokers are able to source the cover for an organization if it's required for their type of operation. Did that help?
Yep, that's exactly it. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to do one more sort of shout out for any additional questions. Okay. Haily, Bradley, thank you both so much for giving so freely of your time and expertise. We very much appreciate it. Haily, if you're comfortable with doing so, I will grab the text of the presentation that you offered and offer it on to all the people who registered for this workshop. And on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for this. We are all the better for it.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
All right.
And I would offer up, David, that if folks, their fellow art community, if they got questions for me, I'm happy to respond as well.
That would be terrific. I suspect one of the questions that you're fielding most frequently is, when can I get a tour?
Yeah. When are you gonna open? When are you opening, and when can I see it? Yeah, for sure. Well, hopefully in 222, everybody. That's all I can say.
So excited. All right. Well, thank you both so much, and have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.